The words tore out of Noah before he could stop them. Please don't take my mom away. Miami Children's Hospital, 3rd floor cardiac unit, 11:11 p.m. Lightning cracked against the window like a whip. Rain hammered the glass in waves, each gust of wind pushing harder, angrier, relentless. 7-year-old Noah Harper lay in a hospital bed surrounded by machines that beeped with mechanical indifference. Wires taped to his thin chest. Leads running to monitors that traced the failing rhythm of his heart in green lines across black screens. His small hand gripped Isabella Harper's wrist with white-knuckled desperation. Dr. Chen stood at the foot of the bed holding a tablet. The echocardiogram images glowed against her tired face. She had delivered this speech 6 times today. The words never got easier. The congenital valve defect is severe, she said, her voice steady but her eyes full of practiced sympathy. We need surgery within 3 days. The cost is $150,000. Without the procedure, his heart will fail. It's not a question of if anymore. It's when. Isabella's other hand clutched a photograph. Laminated edges worn soft from constant touching. Marcus, her husband, frozen in time at age 32. His smile caught mid-laugh. This photo was 5 years old. Marcus had been dead for 4 years, 9 months, and 17 days. She did not need to count. Her body counted for her. In her pocket, Isabella had $34. For crumpled 10s, 3 5s, and 9 1s. Everything she owned that could be converted to cash. It was supposed to last for more days. Groceries. Bus fare. The school supplies Noah needed for the new semester that started Monday. Now it meant nothing. Dr. Chen continued, her words becoming background noise. Insurance wouldn't cover it, pre-existing condition, deemed congenital, classified as ineligible. Payment plans were available, but the interest would make the total closer to $200,000. Private funding, clinical trials, charitable organizations. She listed them like items on a grocery list. Like any of it mattered. Isabella's eyes never left Noah's face. Across the room, in the corner where the shadows pooled deepest, a man stood perfectly still. Nico Marino wore a suit that cost $4,000. The fabric was Italian wool, charcoal gray, tailored so precisely that every seam looked deliberate, dangerous, intentional. His white shirt was open at the collar, exposing the hollow of his throat and a thin gold chain. His watch was Patek Philippe, worth more than a year of Isabella's old rent. His shoes were leather so fine they looked like they might dissolve if water touched them. He stood in the darkness because he preferred it there. The darkness did not ask questions. The darkness did not judge. The darkness simply held him. His dark eyes were fixed on Noah's face. Not the boy himself. The boy was merely the catalyst. What Nico saw was a memory wearing the face of a 7-year-old. A different hospital room. A different bed. 7 years ago, when he held a daughter who never drew breath. Luminella. The name meant little light in the old language his grandmother spoke, the one he had tried to forget. She weighed 4 pounds, 3 ounces. She was perfect and she was dead and she was his. The stillbirth had happened on a Tuesday night in November. Nico had sat alone in the penthouse afterward, staring at a nursery that had been painted seafoam blue, filled with toys that would never be touched, a crib that would never rock a sleeping child. For 7 years, he had locked that door and told no one, not his men, not his associates, not even the woman who had carried Luminella for 9 months and then buried the weight of that loss so deep inside herself that she stopped speaking altogether. After 1 year of silence, he had released her to start a new life somewhere, anywhere, away from him and away from the memory of what they had almost been. The penthouse door still had a lock. The nursery was still painted seafoam blue. Now, watching Noah cling to his mother, watching the way the boy's small fingers gripped fabric like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth, something shifted in Nico's chest. Something cold and dangerous stirred. Noah spoke again, his voice smaller now, exhausted from crying. The other kids in my class, their moms can pick them up whenever they want. They don't have to work all the time. They eat dinner together. I want that. Isabella leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. I know, baby. I know. Will you go away like Dad? The question landed like a blade. Isabella's shoulders tensed. Her jaw tightened. The photograph in her hand trembled. No, she whispered. Never. I will always come back to you. She did not know if this was true. She did not know if she could work enough hours, earn enough money, make enough miracles happen to keep them together. Social services had already opened a file. Harold Brennan, her landlord, had made it clear that he was willing to testify that she was an unfit parent. Too poor. Too desperate. Too likely to lose custody. Unless, of course, she signed over her guardianship rights now, voluntarily, before the court had to intervene. He had been generous enough to suggest that maybe one of his associates, a wealthy woman named Cordelia Blackwood, would be willing to take Noah in. Raise him properly. Give him the life he deserved. Cordelia Blackwood. The woman who had spent the last year fabricating evidence online, posting doctored photographs, spreading lies about Isabella that had cost her 2 jobs. The woman who had never seen Noah in person, had never spoken to him, had never done anything except orchestrate his mother's destruction with the precision of someone playing chess. Dr. Chen finished her speech. She set down the tablet and offered Isabella a pamphlet about payment assistance programs. The pamphlet felt like paper and false hope and broken promises all compressed into cardstock. We'll move him to a private room tonight, Dr. Chen said. Call me if anything changes. Any chest pain, any difficulty breathing, any change in color or consciousness. Call immediately. His heart could stop without warning. She left. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway. The hospital resumed its nighttime rhythm, fluorescent lights humming, machines beeping, the distant sound of a page over the intercom. In the corner, Nico moved for the first time. His hands were scarred. The knuckles bore the white lines of old breaks that had set wrong and healed without medical attention. These hands had broken bones. These hands had ended lives. These hands had held nothing gentle in 47 years. And now they were trembling. Carlo and Pietro had followed him to the hospital without being instructed to do so. They sensed that something had shifted. Their boss never deviated from routine. Their boss never followed a woman who worked as a night shift waitress earning $2 an hour plus tips. Their boss did not stand in hospital rooms watching mothers and children fall apart. Carlo caught Pietro's eye from across the room. Neither man had any explanation for what they were witnessing. Nico stepped forward, emerging from the shadows like a shape materializing from fog. The overhead light caught the lines of his face for the first time. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone. A blade had put it there 25 years ago, when he was young and reckless and not yet untouchable. His dark eyes were the color of a storm that had not yet broken. His expression was the kind of calm that comes before violence, or mercy, or both simultaneously. Isabella turned and saw him. Her body went rigid. Her first instinct was fear. A strange man in a $4,000 suit did not appear in hospital rooms without intention. His 2 associates stood behind him like sculptures carved from malice. This was not a good sign. This was not a sign of anything except that her bad luck had simply continued evolving. Nico said nothing. He simply looked at Noah. Looked at the boy's pale face, his labored breathing, the way his small body seemed to be surrendering to the machinery keeping him alive. Then he looked at Isabella. What is his name? His voice was like thunder rolling across a distance. Deep. Solid like an oath. A voice that did not ask questions casually. Noah, Isabella whispered. She did not ask who he was. She did not ask how he had gotten into the hospital. In a city like Miami, in the kind of circumstances that had crushed her into poverty, you learned not to ask those questions. You simply accepted that powerful men existed and operated according to rules that had nothing to do with you. His medical records show a congenital valve defect that requires emergency surgery, Nico said. This was not a question. He was simply stating what he knew. Isabella's mouth went dry. How do you? The surgery costs $150,000, Nico continued. You have $34 in your possession. You will have the surgery paid for before sunrise. The words landed in the quiet room like stones into still water. Isabella stared at him. Disbelief and hope warred across her face, and hope was losing because hope was a luxury she had learned not to afford. Why would you? Because the people who did this to you believed you were nobody, Nico said. His eyes were still on Noah, not on Isabella. The world made you invisible. But invisibility does not mean non-existence. It simply means the powerful did not bother to see you. That ends tonight. Carlo and Pietro exchanged looks of pure shock. In 15 years of working for Nico Marino, they had never heard him speak like this. They had never seen him show mercy to anyone. Mercy was a weakness. Mercy was how empires fell. But as they watched their boss, as they saw the trembling of his scarred hands, as they witnessed the moment when something that had been locked away for 7 years finally broke open, they understood that what they were watching was not mercy at all. It was the awakening of a man who had lost everything once before. Outside, lightning split the sky. Thunder followed seconds later, so loud it seemed to shake the hospital walls. The storm was intensifying. The night was getting darker. But in room 317, something had shifted. A boy would have his surgery. A mother would not lose her son. And a man who had forgotten how to feel anything except the absence of his dead daughter was about to discover that grief, when channeled correctly, was the most powerful force in the world. What happened next was something no one could explain. But the consequences would ripple outward like that storm, like lightning seeking the path of least resistance, like thunder announcing that the sky itself had broken open. And none of them knew it yet, but this moment, this single moment when a stranger decided to intervene, would begin the systematic destruction of every person who had contributed to Isabella Harper's suffering. Before we continue, drop a like if this story is hitting you the way it's hitting us. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because the revelation about who Nico Marino really is, and what he witnessed earlier that night, will change everything. Now let us rewind to 6 hours earlier, to a rain-soaked Miami street where a woman with nothing left to lose made a choice that no amount of poverty could stop her from making. 6 hours earlier, the rain came down like a blade wrapped in ice. The 1998 Honda Civic sat parked 2 blocks from Sacred Heart Shelter, its cracked windshield collecting drops that fell faster and faster as the storm rolled in from the Atlantic. Inside, Isabella Harper slept across the front seat, her small frame folded like origami, one hand still gripping the hospital discharge papers even as her exhausted body surrendered to unconsciousness. Her entire life fit into a canvas backpack wedged between the passenger seat and the door. 3 shirts. 2 pairs of jeans. Noah's school photo from last year when he still smiled without that careful wariness in his eyes. Marcus's photograph, creased from being held too many times, the only proof that once she had belonged to someone who mattered. A toothbrush. A bar of soap stolen from a gas station bathroom 3 weeks ago. The backpack smelled like mildew and desperation. At 4:13 in the morning, Isabella woke to the sound of her own breathing, ragged, shallow, the breathing of someone whose sleep was no longer restful. She sat up slowly, every vertebra in her spine clicking like a spine that had forgotten how to move smoothly. The rain drummed against the windshield. She watched it for exactly 3 minutes before climbing out into the downpour. The Chevron station bathroom was empty. She washed her face in the sink, watching water swirl down the drain with the same hypnotic fixation as someone watching her life disappear. Then she washed her armpits with a paper towel and soap from the dispenser. She changed into her least stained shirt, the blue one with a button missing on the left side, and checked her reflection. A woman stared back. 28 years old but looking 40. Hollow eyes. Skin stretched too tight. Hair the color of wet cement. She did not recognize herself anymore. That woman had died somewhere on a Greyhound bus 3 months ago, the day she lost her job at the law firm for stealing a pen that had actually been hers all along. The walk to Miami Children's Hospital took 17 minutes. She counted them. 17 minutes of her shoes splashing through puddles, 17 minutes of her jacket getting soaked, 17 minutes of knowing that what was about to happen would change everything. The cardiologist's office smelled like hand sanitizer and false hope. Dr. Patterson was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who delivered bad news 6 times a day. He placed his hand on the desk between them, a gesture meant to convey gentleness. It conveyed nothing but distance. The echocardiogram shows significant stenosis, he said, his voice moving at the careful pace people use when talking to the recently diagnosed. The aortic valve is severely narrowed. Without surgical intervention, Noah faces progressive deterioration of cardiac function, which could result in syncope, heart failure, or sudden cardiac death. The words fell like stones into still water. Syncope. Cardiac death. Sudden. How long does he have? Isabella whispered, though every nerve in her body already knew the answer. Without surgery. Dr. Patterson removed his glasses. His eyes looked older without them. 3 months, possibly 6 if we're fortunate. With surgery, he has a normal lifespan. How much? Her voice had become something smaller than a whisper. It had become barely audible, like a prayer from someone who'd stopped believing in prayer. How much does it cost? The valve replacement, the anesthesia, the hospital stay, post-operative care, approximately $150,000. Your insurance claim was denied, I understand. She did not answer because there was nothing to answer. She had called the insurance company 16 times. 16 times they had explained that her coverage had lapsed when she lost her job. She had begged. They had transferred her to different departments. She had cried. They had offered her a payment plan at 18% interest, which meant she would be paying $300,000 by the time she died. She had hung up the phone and not called back. There are financing options, Dr. Patterson continued. Medical loans, hospital payment plans, perhaps community assistance programs. I have $34, Isabella said. The words came out flat, empty of inflection. I have $34 to my name, and the surgery needs to happen within 3 days, and I have no home, and I have nowhere to go, and my son is going to die because I cannot give him what he needs. She did not cry. She had learned somewhere in the past 3 months that crying was a luxury item, like whole milk or heat in the winter. She had learned that tears came from reserves of hope, and her reserves had been depleted somewhere around the moment her husband's casket lowered into the ground. The rain was heavier when she emerged from the hospital. The sky had turned the color of a bruise, purple-black and swollen. Lightning flickered in the distance. She stood in the parking lot for 9 minutes, just standing, her clothes soaked, $34 gripped in her fist so tightly her nails drew blood from her palm. At 8:15 in the evening, the sky opened completely. Not rain anymore but apocalypse, water falling so hard it seemed to wash the world clean. Isabella walked through empty sidewalks, neon signs reflecting off wet asphalt like dreams from a life she didn't live. She passed an abandoned doorway where an older woman huddled with plastic bags. She passed a boarded-up laundromat. She passed a storefront church with a hand-painted sign that read, "God still works miracles." She didn't stop. Miracles were for people who still believed. The Azure nightclub occupied a corner of Biscayne Boulevard where the streetlights had stopped working 3 years ago and nobody had bothered to fix them. The building squatted between 2 abandoned warehouses like a predator in prey clothing. Outside, 2 men in expensive suits stood in the rain without umbrellas because men like these did not fear water or cold or consequences. The first man was named Carlo. Tall, broad-shouldered, his suit tailored to emphasize a musculature that spent 3 hours a day in a private gym. His hair was slicked back from a face that had never learned to smile. The second man was Pietro, shorter but somehow more menacing, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw like a map of violence. They had a young man pinned against the brick wall. Marcus Chen, 23 years old, a tenant in one of Harold Brennan's buildings, someone whose only crime was being unable to pay the protection money that came due every month. The same Harold Brennan who had sent Isabella an eviction notice. The same Harold Brennan who threatened to report her as an unfit mother unless she signed guardianship of Noah to the state. The same Harold Brennan who owned half the buildings in Miami's poorest neighborhoods and squeezed money from everyone too damaged by life to fight back. Carlo had Marcus by the collar. His fist was pulling the young man's shirt, and Marcus was trembling like a wounded animal backed into a corner. "Mr. Brennan has been patient," Carlo was saying, his voice like venom disguised as politeness. "But patience has limits. The lease rights transfer, or we have a problem." "I can't," Marcus was saying. "My grandmother lived there for 40 years. I can't just sign." Pietro pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. The rain was destroying the edges, but the words remained clear enough. Lease rights. Total forfeiture. The signature line waiting like an open mouth. Isabella saw this from a block away. She saw it, and something in her chest, something that had been locked down and frozen since the moment her husband died, something that had been colder than winter and harder than stone, suddenly cracked open like ice in spring. She did not think. She did not calculate consequences. She did not consider that these men might carry weapons, might operate under a code of violence she could not comprehend, might destroy her as easily as stepping on an ant. She walked forward through the rain. Her shoes splashed through puddles. Her breath came in clouds. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something older and more primal. The fury of someone who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. She stepped between Carlo and Marcus Chen. "Leave him alone," she said. Her voice did not shake. It came out steady and clear and absolute, like a blade cutting through air. "Step away from him." Carlo's hand moved toward his waistband. She could see it happening in slow motion, see his fingers reaching for the weapon she knew was there because men like Carlo always carried weapons. But she didn't move. She planted both palms on his chest and pushed with all her remaining strength, which wasn't much but was enough because he wasn't expecting it, wasn't expecting a woman soaked in rain and desperation to have the audacity to touch him. He stumbled backward into a puddle. Water splashed up his expensive suit. Pietro laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass. "You understand what you just did?" he asked, stepping toward her. His scar seemed to deepen in a lightning flash. "You understand that you just put your hands on a man who could have you disappeared before sunrise?" "I understand," Isabella said, "that you're threatening someone who can't fight back. That's cowardice. That's the signature move of men too weak to find real enemies." Pietro's hand moved toward his own waistband. But across the street, in the penthouse shadows of the Marino building, Nico Marino watched. The floor-to-ceiling windows of his office looked out over Miami's underworld like a throne overlooking a kingdom of flesh and money. A glass of scotch was frozen halfway to his lips, expensive whiskey that cost more than most people's monthly rent, untouched and slowly warming in his hand. Marco and Enzo stood in the darkness beside him, their silhouettes carved from shadow. They all saw her. In 15 years of running Miami's most ruthless criminal empire, in 15 years of watching men beg, women seduce, rivals negotiate their own executions, Nico had never seen what he was seeing now. A homeless woman. Soaked in rain. With hair plastered to her face and trembling hands that held no weapon, no leverage, no advantage of any kind. Standing against his own men like she had nothing to lose because she didn't. Like she was already dead inside and therefore invulnerable. Like she was the most dangerous thing he had ever seen. The elevator descended through the Marino building with the soft hum of expensive machinery. Nico stood motionless, his reflection fractured across the polished steel doors, a man carved from shadow and tailored Italian wool, his charcoal suit worth more than a year of Isabella's rent. The file sat in his hands, a folder containing every fracture of her life reduced to typed words and dates and dollar amounts. 32 years old. Widowed 14 months. Currently homeless. Her son's heart was dying on a timeline measured in weeks, not months. He reached the ground floor. The doors slid open onto the marble lobby where Carlo and Pietro waited, their bodies tense in the way of men who'd witnessed something unprecedented the night before, their boss's expression when he'd looked at the woman in the rain. A woman with nothing. A woman with everything to lose. The hospital, Nico said, moving toward the exit. His voice was the kind of calm that preceded catastrophe. Mercy Hospital, Pediatric Cardiology Wing. I want Isabella Harper's son admitted for pre-surgical evaluation. I want the best cardiac surgeon in the Southeast. I want everything prepared for tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. surgical start. Dr. Richard Morrison, no substitutes. Carlo kept pace. That's $150,000, minimum. Private suite, specialized team, post-operative care. I'm aware of the cost. Nico's jaw tightened. Bill it to my personal account. And get me everything on Harold Brennan. Property records, bank transfers, tenant complaints, payoffs to inspectors. I want to know every illegal corner of his operation. Every threat he's made. Every family he's destroyed. The rain had stopped during the night, but the streets were still wet, the asphalt gleaming like a mirror under Miami's early morning light. Nico's black SUV pulled away from the curb with the precision of a blade. Behind it, two more vehicles followed, men in suits and dark sunglasses, their movement synchronized like a choreography of power and violence. What Nico didn't know was that Harold Brennan had already made his final move. The phone call came at 6:48 a.m., Cordelia Blackwood's voice sharp and polished as broken glass. The mother will be at the hospital this morning, she said. The boy is having surgery at 7. She'll be alone, distracted, vulnerable. We move the social services raid at 9 a.m., when she's in the surgical waiting room with no one to defend her position. Harold Brennan sat in his office, a room that smelled of cigar smoke and old money obtained through coercion, and smiled. 2 birds, he said. We remove the child, she loses the guardianship case, we pressure her to sign over the lease rights, and you get what you want. A sympathetic charity case for your foundation. A orphan, Cordelia corrected, is much more useful than a mother with complications. The hospital cafeteria at 6:53 a.m. was nearly empty. Isabella sat across from Noah, watching him push scrambled eggs around a plastic plate. The hospital had provided them with breakfast courtesy of the social worker's office, charity that tasted like ash in her mouth because she knew what it meant. It meant they were watching. It meant her competence as a mother was being measured in her ability to feed her son, and she was failing. Noah wore a hospital bracelet with his name printed in black letters. His small face was pale under the fluorescent lights, the overhead buzz creating a constant low hum that made her teeth ache. "Mommy, my arm is cold," Noah said, looking at the foresight where the pre-op nurses had placed the line. Isabella reached across the table and covered his arm with her cardigan, the thin fabric providing almost no warmth. It was the only way she knew how to protect him, with pieces of herself unraveling. The elevator doors opened on the 5th floor. Nico emerged, dressed in his dark suit, and the entire hallway seemed to contract around him. Carlo and Pietro flanked him, but they remained several paces behind as he walked toward the pediatric cardiology wing. A nurse at the station looked up, confusion crossing her face at the sight of this man, clearly dangerous, clearly expensive, clearly out of place in a children's hospital. "Isabella Harper," he said. Not a question. A destination. The nurse pointed without speaking. Some people don't require politeness in the presence of power. Nico walked toward the cafeteria with the unhurried stride of a man who had never been refused anything. And when he saw her, seated at a corner table in a hospital cafeteria, wearing a cardigan so thin it was nearly transparent, holding a small boy whose medical bracelet caught the light, something in his chest shifted like a tectonic plate moving after centuries of stillness. She looked up. Her eyes were the color of coffee made from yesterday's grounds, brown and exhausted and still holding a spark of defiance that the past 14 months had failed to extinguish. Her hands trembled around her water cup. She pulled Noah closer instinctively, a mother recognizing a predator even when that predator came bearing gifts. "You," she whispered. From last night. Nico pulled out a chair and sat without invitation. His movements were precise, controlled, the movements of a man who had learned long ago that hesitation was weakness. "The surgery is funded," he said quietly. $150,000. Transferred this morning to Mercy Hospital's pediatric cardiac program. Dr. Richard Morrison will perform the procedure at 7 a.m. Your son will live. The water cup slipped from Isabella's fingers and shattered against the cafeteria tile. The sound echoed, a percussion note of chaos in the sterile silence. Noah looked at his mother, then at Nico. His 7-year-old eyes were wise in a way that children whose bodies had betrayed them often were. "Are you the man who fixes hearts?" he asked. "I'm trying to," Nico said. He kept his gaze on the boy, his expression softening in a way that would have shocked anyone who'd seen him conduct business. "Are you afraid?" Noah nodded, honest in the way of children. "I don't want my mommy to be alone." "She won't be alone," Nico said. "I promise you that." But at that precise moment, at 6:58 a.m., 2 minutes before Noah Harper's life would change entirely, a black sedan pulled into the hospital parking lot. Harold Brennan sat in the back seat, a man in his early 60s with thinning hair dyed too dark and hand-stained with the metaphorical blood of 100 evicted families. Beside him sat Cordelia Blackwood, her pearls catching the morning light, her smile the kind that had perfected cruelty into an art form. With them were 2 social services officers, a court-ordered removal warrant, and the absolute certainty that by 9 a.m., Noah Harper would be in state custody and Isabella Harper would be alone. Nico's phone buzzed. A text from one of his research analysts found the connection. Harold Brennan and Cordelia Blackwood coordinated their moves. She fabricated the theft accusation. He's providing the legal pressure. They're working together to separate the child from the mother. Nico read the message 3 times. The realization crystallized into something cold and precise and absolutely final. These 2 people had orchestrated the destruction of a woman and child with the same casualness that other people made breakfast decisions. He looked at Isabella, who was still staring at him in shock, her entire body trembling. He looked at Noah, who had taken his mother's hand and was squeezing it with the desperation of a child who understood on some cellular level that he was losing her. In approximately 90 minutes, Nico said slowly, 2 people are going to arrive at this hospital with papers that say they have the right to take your son. They will tell you that you are an inadequate mother. That your poverty disqualifies you from parenthood. That the state can care for him better than you can. He paused. They are wrong. And before they can reach the 2nd floor of this hospital, those papers will be worthless. Isabella's mouth opened. She had no words. She had never existed in a world where someone with the power to destroy predators simply did it. Because it was right. Because a child had asked. Because he'd made a promise. Nico stood. Your son goes to surgery in 4 minutes. You will be there when he wakes up. I will make certain of it. He walked back toward the elevator, his lieutenants moving with him like shadows. Behind them, Isabella sat holding her son, and for the first time in 14 months, something that might have been hope, fragile, improbable, impossible, began to bloom. The hospital clock ticked towards 7 a.m. In the pre-op bay, the anesthesiologist was preparing Noah's medication. The surgical team was moving into position. And somewhere in the building's lower levels, Harold Brennan was ascending in an elevator with documents that would never reach their intended destination. The waiting room fell silent. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet morning, but the kind that happens when the world stops turning for a moment, the silence before everything breaks. Isabella stood slowly, her body moving like someone pulling themselves out of deep water. She didn't feel the cool tile beneath her feet, didn't register the other families waiting for their own surgeries, their own miracles. Her entire existence had narrowed to the space between her and the 2 people walking toward her with the casual confidence of predators who had never once faced resistance. Harold Brennan moved like a man who owned the air around him. 58 years old, thick-necked, the kind of bulk that came from expensive restaurants and older money. His suit was charcoal gray, Italian wool, a platinum watch catching the fluorescent light on his wrist. 3 gold rings on his left hand, a diamond signet on his right. He'd bought his way into every room he'd ever entered, and it showed in the way his shoulders took up space that didn't belong to him. Beside him walked Cordelia Blackwood in cream Chanel, her hair styled in the kind of careful waves that required $200 salon appointments every 3 weeks. Her makeup was immaculate, a study in practiced sympathy, in the art of looking concerned while feeling nothing. She carried herself like a woman who had never once doubted her own righteousness, who believed that her wealth and her name made her decisions moral by default. Behind them came 2 social services officers in dark blue, carrying clipboards with the weight of bureaucratic authority. Court orders. Papers that would tear her son away from her and scatter him into a system that would chew him up and spit him out broken. Isabella Harper. Brennan's voice was loud enough for the entire waiting room to hear. Deliberate. A performance. You are in violation of your lease agreement, residing without a legal address, and demonstrating a chronic inability to provide stable housing for a minor child. The other families turned. Their eyes landed on Isabella like accusations. Cordelia stepped forward, her smile blooming like a poisoned flower. Her voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow louder than Brennan's shout, the whisper of a woman accustomed to being listened to. This is for Noah's own good, dear. You're clearly unfit. Living in your car. No income. No permanent home. My foundation has already prepared a room for him. He'll have everything. Education, stability, love. Everything you simply cannot provide. The word cannot hung in the air like a curse. Isabella's hands trembled. She'd been waiting for this moment for 14 months, ever since the first fake accusation appeared in her employment file. She'd known it was coming, the same way an animal knows when the trap is closing. But knowing something and surviving it are 2 different things. She opened her mouth. Her voice came out steady, which was a miracle in itself. You fabricated evidence. You edited security footage. You've been destroying my life for a year so you could steal my son. Prove it, Cordelia said sweetly. The words were a knife wrapped in velvet. The social services officers moved forward with the court order extended, the papers fluttering slightly like leaves disturbed by wind. This was the moment. This was her rock bottom, standing alone in a hospital waiting room while her son lay in surgery fighting for his life, facing 2 powerful people who'd spent a year systematically dismantling everything she had left, holding legal documents that would rip Noah away from her forever. Her hand shook. Her vision blurred at the edges. She thought about Marcus's photograph in her pocket, the only proof she'd ever belonged to anyone. She thought about the $11 remaining from the $34 that was all she had left in the world. She thought about gas station bathrooms and sleeping in her car and the absolute, crushing certainty that she was going to lose. Outside the windows, rain began to fall. Not a gentle rain, a summer storm rolling in fast and violent, lightning cracking across grey clouds like the world splitting open. But something shifted inside Isabella Harper in that moment. Something small and hard and unbreakable. Noah's voice this morning, please don't take my mom away. She had promised him she would be there when he woke up. She had made that promise to a 7-year-old boy who'd lost his father, who'd watched his mother become invisible, who still believed that she was strong enough to protect him. If she gave up now, that promise would be a lie. Isabella lifted her eyes to Harold Brennan's face and spoke clearly, each word a brick in a wall. No. You will not take my son. Not today. Not ever. Brennan's expression darkened like a storm cloud. His face reddened. You don't have a choice. Officers, remove her from. The waiting room doors opened. 12 men in black suits moved through like ghosts, fanning out with military precision, their movement synchronized as if they'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. They wore identical dark suits and dark ties, and every single one of them moved with the controlled violence of people trained in the art of making problems disappear. Nico Marino walked through the center of them, flanked by Carlo and Pietro, carrying a leather portfolio. Behind him came two men in FBI windbreakers and a woman carrying a news camera, the red light already recording. The waiting room shifted. The air itself changed density. The lady said no, Nico said quietly. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, and it made the walls listen. Brennan's face went purple. You can't interfere with a legal proceeding. Legal? Nico opened the portfolio and removed documents one by one, laying them on the waiting room table with the precision of a dealer laying down trump cards. Falsified building inspections dating back 6 years. 53 forged eviction notices. Bank records showing $50,000 payments to Judge Morrison for favorable rulings. Wiretapped conversations between you and Cordelia Blackwood coordinating the systematic destruction of Isabella Harper's employment and housing. He looked at Cordelia without blinking. Security footage, the real footage, not the version you edited, showing you personally accessing Mercy Hospital servers to alter the theft accusation. Financial records documenting the 12 other families you've targeted through your foundation. Testimony from 4 mothers whose children you attempted to remove through coercion. The FBI agent stepped forward. One of them, a woman with cold eyes, read from a document. Harold Brennan, Cordelia Blackwood, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, falsifying legal documents, wire fraud, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. Brennan's legs buckled. He dropped to his knees like a puppet with its strings cut, trembling like a cornered animal, his entire swagger evaporating in a single moment. His expensive suit suddenly looked ridiculous on his collapsing frame. Wait, we can make a deal, I have money. Your money is frozen, the FBI agent said flatly. Every account. Every property. Every asset. Federal seizure as of 6:53 a.m. this morning. Cordelia's perfect composure cracked like old paint. Her hand went to her throat. Do you know who I am? I have connections, the mayor, the police commissioner. Had connections, Nico corrected. Past tense. The live news broadcast started 4 minutes ago. Every piece of evidence is uploading to the internet right now. By the time they finish handcuffing you, your allies will already be writing statements to distance themselves from you. The news camera was rolling. The waiting room had filled with people holding phones, recording everything. On the mounted television in the corner, Cordelia's face appeared on the afternoon news, the anchors already discussing the breaking scandal, her foundation's website crashing under the weight of traffic, her social media accounts exploding with outrage and contempt. Her humiliation would be total and permanent and documented from every angle. Too quick, too easy, too merciful, Nico said, would be making you disappear. This is better. Federal prison, 40 years minimum. Every single day knowing that everyone you tried to impress sees you exactly as you are, not a philanthropist, not a society lady. A predator. A thief. A liar. The FBI agents cuffed them both. Brennan was openly weeping, begging, his pleas dissolving into incoherent sobs. Cordelia's mouth opened and closed like a fish dying on dry land, her perfect facade shattered beyond repair. They were led out through a gauntlet of cameras and phones, their downfall documented and broadcast and immortalized. The waiting room returned to its normal chaos. The other families returning to their own prayers. The machines continuing their steady beeping. The rain continuing to fall against the windows. Isabella stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Her legs felt like they might give out. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't steady them. Nico turned to her, and in that moment, he wasn't a Mafia boss. He was just a man who had kept a promise to a child. Noah's surgery is going well. Dr. Morrison sent an update 3 minutes ago. Another hour, maybe 2, and he'll be in recovery. You did this, Isabella whispered. You destroyed them. They destroyed themselves, Nico said. I just made sure everyone could see it. Noah's surgical monitors beeped steadily, a rhythm like a heartbeat that had learned to survive. Before dripped clear fluid into his small arm, and his chest rose and fell beneath the hospital gown, the valve inside his heart holding steady for the first time in his life. Isabella sat in the plastic chair beside his bed, her hand resting on the mattress an inch from his, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loud, afraid that any disturbance might break the fragile peace of his sleeping face. Dr. Morrison had emerged from the operating room at 11:44 p.m. Perfect closure. No complications. Excellent prognosis. He's going to have a full, normal life. Those words had shattered something inside Isabella, not her, but the weight she'd been carrying since the moment she read the hospital bill. The weight that said her son might die. The weight that said she wasn't enough to save him. Nico had waited in the hallway during surgery. 14 hours in a plastic chair in a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and desperation. His black suit had looked obscene against the fluorescent lights and the worn upholstery. Carlo and Pietro flanked him like sentries, silent and watchful, because men like Nico Marino did not wait in hospital waiting rooms. But he had. For Noah. For the child who had whispered, "Please don't take my mom away." 6 nights Isabella slept in that chair, her body cramped, her mind refusing to fully rest until she was certain. On the 7th day, the nurses finally convinced her that Noah was stable enough, strong enough, that she needed to shower and eat something that wasn't coffee from a vending machine. She was gone for 2 hours. When she returned, Nico was there, sitting on the edge of Noah's bed, his scarred fingers moving slowly through a children's book about a boy with a brave heart. Noah was awake, his eyes bright, color returning to his cheeks. "He reads funny voices," Noah said, and it was the first time in months Isabella had heard genuine joy in his voice. Nico looked up at her, and she saw something she'd never seen before, something gentle, something almost broken. "Your mother is here," he said to Noah. Then to Isabella, "He's been asking for you." The second week after discharge, a man in an expensive suit arrived at the apartment Nico had secured for them. 2 bedrooms, safe neighborhood, first year's rent paid in full. The man carried an envelope and a folder with a silver logo on the cover. "Medical billing specialist," the man said, setting the folder on the kitchen table. "Salary of $52,000 annually. Health insurance, dental, vision, 401k match. You start Monday." Isabella stared at the folder. She'd worked minimum wage for 8 years. She couldn't read the number on the salary line without her vision blurring. "Why?" she asked when Nico arrived that evening with takeout containers from a restaurant she'd never been able to afford. He was arranging plates on the counter when he answered. "Because you deserve it. Because Noah deserves stability. Because the world tried to crush you and you're still standing." He turned to face her, and his voice dropped. "Because I promised him I'd keep you safe. Both of you." For 3 weeks, they built something small and tentative and real. Dinners where Noah talked about his new school and his scar that was getting cooler every day. Walks through Wynwood Park where Nico bought Noah ice cream and Isabella pretended not to notice how the other women looked at him. Conversations on the apartment balcony at night, the Miami skyline glittering beyond them, where Nico told her things, not everything, never everything, but pieces of himself he'd never shared. "I had a daughter once," he said on a Tuesday night, his voice like gravel. "Sophia. She was stillborn. 7 years ago. Her mother couldn't stay after that. The nursery is still the same. I haven't changed a single toy." He was silent for a long time. When Noah whispered those words in the hospital bed, all I could think was, if I could save him, maybe I could save something. Maybe I could save someone. Isabella reached for his hand. It was scarred, heavy with the weight of violence and survival. "You did save him. You saved both of us." "Not enough," Nico said. "There's never enough." Then he stopped coming. The dinner reservation he'd made for Friday, cancelled. His phone went to voicemail. When Isabella called Carlo, his answer was always the same, business. "He'll be in touch." But he wasn't. Days became a week. A week became a month. Isabella threw herself into work, into being present for Noah, into building the life that Nico had made possible. She didn't let herself think about dark eyes and the scar running from temple to cheekbone. She didn't think about his hands. She definitely didn't think about the night he'd knelt beside Noah's hospital bed and promised a child everything. 11 months passed. Then 12. Then a year and a week. Isabella received an invitation to a charity gala, a black tie event honoring donors and survivors of cardiac surgery. The irony was crushing. A year ago, she couldn't afford the hospital bill. Now she was being invited to celebrate it. Her supervisor had encouraged her to attend. Dr. Morrison was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award. She bought a black dress. Simple. Elegant. The first thing she'd purchased for herself since the foreclosure notice. Noah's babysitter, a woman from her church who'd become something like family, arrived at 6 in the evening. Isabella tucked him into bed, kissed his forehead, and drove toward the penthouse ballroom overlooking Biscayne Bay. At 9:15 p.m., feeling small among Miami's wealth, she stepped onto the balcony. The air was warm. Salt and jasmine. The skyline glittered like a promise that the city could be beautiful, could be merciful, could be more than just survival. "You're successful now," a voice said behind her. Isabella turned. Nico Marino stood in the doorway. Black tuxedo. Exhaustion carved into his face like something permanent. Older. Changed. "I read about your promotion," he continued. His voice was careful, as if he was afraid she might shatter. "You disappeared," Isabella said, and heard the anger she'd been swallowing for a year. Without explanation. Without goodbye. Without, her voice broke. Without trust. Nico stepped onto the balcony but kept distance between them. "I needed to be certain you were safe. That Brennan's associates wouldn't retaliate. That Cordelia's connections couldn't reach you. I had to burn bridges that took years to build. Call in every favor I'd ever earned. Make it clear that you and Noah were untouchable." He gripped the railing. "And I needed to walk away because I didn't know how to stay. You don't get to decide. I spent a year trying to forget you. How you stood in front of armed men. How you held Noah's hand and refused to break. How you looked at me like I was more than blood and violence." His eyes were wet. "I love you. I have since the rain. I love your son. I love the life you're building. And I don't know if there's room for someone like me, but I needed you to know. I can't carry this silence anymore." Isabella's hands trembled. She thought about hospital rooms and promises and a man who had kept every single one. "You should have told me a year ago," she whispered. "I know. You should have let me decide what I wanted. I know." "If we do this," Isabella said, stepping closer, close enough to see the scars on his knuckles, "you stay. Through everything. No disappearing. No deciding for me. You stay." Nico took her hand. His fingers were trembling too. "I'll stay," he promised. "For as long as you'll have me." Behind them, through the ballroom windows, Miami glittered and moved on. Somewhere in the city, Noah was safe and healthy and sleeping peacefully. The rain that nearly destroyed them had passed long ago, leaving everything clean and clear. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. They come from the hands of broken men. They come from the courage of women with nothing left to lose. They come when someone decides to stay. If this story moved your heart, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to know that love can survive the darkest storms. Subscribe to this channel. We have more stories waiting for you, stories that prove justice and redemption are always possible. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in Isabella's position? Would you have waited? Would you have forgiven? Come back tomorrow for another story that will change how you see the world. Thank you for staying with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.